And now it's my pleasure to introduce our two guests and give you just the barest bones of who they are, as they will each introduce each other, knowing each other very well. Toby Shapshak hails from Johannesburg, South Africa, and is a technology journalist, the editor and publisher of Stuff magazine. He's been writing and speaking about technology and innovation in Africa for more than 15 years for multiple periodicals, including The Times, The Guardian, The Financial Mail, and hosting a TV show on CNBC Africa. Eric Hersman is an American African. You can see how lucky you are already. Toby Hersman is, Eric Hersman. Sorry, Eric, is an American African as opposed to an African American. From Nairobi, Kenya, he is a technology innovator or creator specializing in the application and impact of web and mobile technology throughout Africa. He runs the popular website AfriGadget. He's the founder of the iHub, which is Nairobi's innovation hub, co-founder of both Ushahidi, a crowdsourcing tool, and Brick, a backup generator for the internet. Together, they will bring you a new vision of Africa as a place in the world you have not seen before. So please welcome Shapshak and Hersman.
So I'm Toby, and Eric, who sounds American, only sounds American. He's actually lived in Africa longer than he's ever been in America, and grew up in South Sudan, as he'll tell you, but he's I like to say he's the most clued up person about technology in Africa. He has helped and enabled and built and done more for technology in Africa, I think, than any other single person. He's been at the cutting edge of 3 different truly incredible projects, which we'll be touching on during the talk. And of course, he is devilishly handsome.
So as Toby was saying, my name is Eric Hersman. I'm really glad to be sharing the stage here with Toby because I've known Toby for a number of years. He's possibly the best writer I've ever read on the changes going across the continent when it comes to technology and innovation. So not just technology that you see and touch, but the businesses and the processes and the new ideas that are also spreading around Africa and then into other continents. So I think we're just going to get started here, but I should warn you, we do normally do talks alone. We have to do it together today. So there might be some bumps along the way as we pass off the baton back and forth, but bear with us. Thanks a lot.
And he was going to say, I'm also devilishly handsome, but not very bright.
Well, I will say for Toby that his girlfriend is way too hot for him.
I say that of myself. So let's start with an important question, including the students hiding at the back. We can see you. Who has an iPhone? Show of hands. Yeah? Who has an Android phone of some description? Who has a BlackBerry? Who will admit in public to having a BlackBerry? Yeah, well done you. No extra points for whatever class you're bunking. So, let's start off. Let's just have a look at the context of the world as we know it. Oh, there we go, if you want to tweet or follow us or anything. That is what a computer used to look like, remember? You know, desktop, a screen, a mouse, a keyboard, everything has evolved. In fact, that's so old you can see Michael Jackson was still black. That's what a computer looks like now. It's portable, it's light, you don't need a keyboard or mouse, you just need God's stylus. That's what the internet used to look like. That's what the internet looks like now. Notice that it's a mobile device. Everything is going mobile. That's what news used to look like. If you take a look at that, anyone remember those things called newspapers or treeware? That's what news looks like now. Same city involving a plane 8 years later. Who broke the news? A guy on the ferry with a cell phone. So they like to call that citizen journalism, but really, what is it? It's being in the right place at the wrong time with a smartphone. That's what telephony used to look like. I believe actually this photograph was taken last Thursday at AT&T. That's what photography used to look like. That's what photography looks like now. Obviously, they might own Instagram pictures of New York and Moscow, so you can tell how cool I am. That's what knowledge used to look like. That's what knowledge looks like now. And whenever you talk about Wikipedia, you have to have this graph about the death of the Encyclopedia Britannica, and people go, oh, it's terrible, and it isn't. It's just a sign of progress. Until a digital screen of some description came along, be it a Kindle or a tablet or a smartphone, a book was just the most efficient delivery mechanism humanity had found for transferring knowledge. That's all that's really changed. So when you talk about Africa, it is de rigueur. Thank you, you three, for sitting in the front, by the way. I hope your necks don't hurt too much. It is de rigueur to look at this picture of Earth from space, and people go, oh, look, it's the dark continent. It isn't, actually. This is a map of innovation, and it's a really easy map to read. Anywhere where there is light, there's no innovation. Why? Because people are too busy watching television or playing Angry Birds, really simply. Whereas in Africa, where more people have access to a cell phone than they do electricity, people have real problems that they need to solve. There's no banking infrastructure to speak of. There's no wired internet to speak of, which Eric will get into more detail later. There are innumerable challenges in Africa that do not happen. When I talk to people about internet in Africa, people think about the internet as something you look at a 14-inch monitor or a tablet or something like that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the internet that you get on a device like this. But we'll get to that in a second. I come from Johannesburg. This is an early picture of a place called Commissioner Street. And Joburg is a mining town. It was built because someone discovered lots of gold under the ground just over 100 years ago. It's a very young city. And just like California and the gold rush, this is what happened. It was a massive gold rush. The difference for me today is that I think the gold of today is mobile. Mobile is where all of the great fortunes are there to be made. The hero to zero stories of our generation are not pioneers who went off and staked a claim and dug up the ground. They, generally bored people who sat at home and had a good idea for an app. Okay, not bored, like highly intelligent, but like, socially inept. Anyway, but what's very interesting for me about mobile is like a railway track. It's like the railroads of our generation. It is the great enabler. If you think about how the railroads developed across Europe and North America and Asia in the 1800s and the 1900s, what happened was, first you had the railroad, then you had all the associated industries related to running the railroad. First, you needed coal or wood, you needed water for steam, and then, of course, you needed little towns for people to stay on. As the railroad got further away, people could explore further, so you had bars, brothels. It's kind of amazing how the porn industry is so rampant even in the non-digital age. The kinds of phones people are using are not these smartphones. These are not the devices that you readily find in Africa. The penetration of smartphone is radically low, and for a whole number of reasons, but mostly because people simply can't afford them, and they don't have very good battery life. So that is the kind of phone that you see most people using. Why? Because it's a very cheap phone. It's $10, if that. And it has really great battery power. People simply do not have access to electricity to be able to charge mobile devices. So, it's a very good question. Why should anyone care? Why should you guys sitting in the audience, starting off in your careers and studying, really, truly give a shit? Well, really simply because, if you haven't noticed, we are the best news story in the world right now. 10 years ago, The Economist ran a front-page headline that said, the hopeless continent. Now they're calling us the hopeful continent. 6 out of the 10 fastest growing economies in the last 10 years were in Africa. How do we know that's true? The Economist told us. Africa has 1 billion people in the 55 states, the 55th is recently been inaugurated. It's South Sudan. It's where Eric spent most of his childhood, there and in East Africa. And with 1 billion people, the vast majority of which are under the age of 30, Africa is at the same point of history that China was when its boom years began. And it's what economists and sociologists call the population dividend, a mass of young people willing and able to work, be it in factories or software development houses, you name it. So 750 SIM cards, this figure was a little out of date. It's from last week sometime. It's probably 780 by now, 780,000. It is not people with a cell phone, it is SIM cards, because people have multiple devices. I have 2 or 3. You have a 3G dongle to get the internet, that kind of thing. But it gives you a sense of it. So why should you care? Well, the key statistic you want to look at this is Africa's middle class is growing at this quite significant rate. And who are the middle class? Well, they're people like us who go to university, get educated, and buy things. The world wants you to buy things. The consumer market drives the world. The projection for Africa's middle class was already 313 million a couple of years ago, and it's going to continue to grow. Don't believe me, believe him. That, by the way, is the South African flag, and Barack Obama was in South Africa last year, and one of the key things he announced was a $7 billion project to roll out electricity and electricity projects across Africa. Why? Because somebody's got to buy those Boeings and those iPads. It is not an easy continent to work in, given the enormous conflicts and civil wars that have been across the country. Just farming is a difficult project, given that there are landmines lying all over, a very pet cause of the late Princess Diana. But the difference is with mobile enables people in a way that's not possible. The World Bank says for every 10% GDP penetration, you get a 1.4% increase in GDP in the country. So this is quite remarkable. It has the ability to really change people's lives. Well, let's have a look at some of the ways that it does. And some of them are so brilliantly commonsensical, you kind of kick yourself for not inventing them yourself, just like so many Scandinavians hate themselves for not coming up with Angry Birds or Flapping Bird. So M-Pesa is the one you've probably heard of, and if you haven't, it is a truly remarkable system of sending money, not by check, not by cash, not by internet transfer, not by EFT, but using a device this small, using SMS. It is truly remarkable. If you want to send $5 to someone in the rural areas, you can send it very quickly and very easy. The other most famous technology innovation that's come out of Africa is a thing called Ushahidi, and Eric was one of the co-founders. In December 2008, there was a very violently contested election in Kenya. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed. It was a truly disastrous thing. And what Eric and his colleagues did was create a device that mashed up basically SMS and Google Maps and allowed you to report instances of violence, of intimidation anywhere in the country. Since then, Ushahidi has been used in a variety of countries to solve an enormous amount of problems. But what is so remarkable is how consistently simple and effective it is using the most basic of devices. So floods in Pakistan, raging fires in Russia, the tsunami in Japan when people didn't know where they were. There's another really great product that we don't really have time to discuss called ping.ushahidi.com that you should take a look at. The Arab Spring, and even here in Detroit. I believe these were incidences of rioting on Black Friday. Okay, snow. Ushahidi is now used in 159 countries, and any of you who are media or digital students will know who Clay Shirky was, and Clay Shirky said to me a few years ago, what you're starting to see is incredible innovation coming out of Africa. It's a sentence you hear more and more often. He said, not incredible innovation coming out of Silicon Valley. This, just by the way, for the one person with the happily waving hand, is the most prolific smartphone in Africa. This is the device that sells more than anything else, and I'll give you a sense of the numbers. Nigeria, which is the most populous country in Africa with 150 million people living in it, one quarter last year sold 4 million smartphones, of which 2 million was this very basic BlackBerry Curve 8350, which is about 4 years old by now. But the phones most people use are these very basic devices. This Nokia 1100 series, according to some calculations I did a few years ago, is the best-selling gadget in the world. Better, yes, I know, can you believe it, than the iPad. It's true. The other one, the Samsung E250, people call it the AK-47 because it just keeps on going and going. Some of the other great services, this is a friend of ours, Bright Simons from Ghana, and what he has is a service called M-Pedigree, really simple. People buy medication that could be completely life-saving, but would you believe it, big pharmaceutical companies often dump expired medication in the third world. I know, it's shocking, don't panic, but this is what people do. So he came up with a service where you put a little sticker on each and every single box, you scratch it, you pull it off, scratch it, send it to a short code number, and it'll tell you whether the medication is legitimate, is expired, what has happened. It's really simple, really effective, and really life-saving. This is a farmer in Ghana, although I actually have no idea where he is, but I definitely know he's in a maize patch. You can see that's a maize leaf, right? Anyway, the story I'm telling you is about Ghana, so let's just imagine he's in Ghana. If you ever hear anyone talk about Africa, he always comes up, whoever he is. He's the most famous unknown Ghanaian ever. So in Ghana, there's a really fantastic service called Farmerline, invented by a young man who ended up working on the family farm but knew nothing about farming and just needed basic information: when to till, when not to till, when to water, when to add fertilizer, etc., etc. And he started the service that sends 160-character messages to people to educate them on the basics of farming and a whole variety of other things. And one of the great stories I heard was about how using this information service, one farmer in Ghana, there he is, saved up enough money to buy the piece of land he lived on. Now that's real economic empowerment, and the way he did it was he got a whole bunch of messages about how to make organic fertilizer. And by making his own fertilizer, he saved the money from buying fertilizer until he could own his own little patch of earth. And I don't know about you, but whenever I see the word organic, it always makes me smile, because basically it just means you can add another zero. You know, I mean, if you call it organic and free range, you can add 2 zeros. If you call it organic, free range, and vegan, you can add 10 zeros. Why does the word vegan always mean you can add so much to a piece of product? But anyway, this is real economic empowerment. One of the other things Farmerline does is send people a list of what prices different products or different harvests are available at different markets. Now, just stop for a second and think this. Most subsistence farmers in Africa live on a tiny piece of property, often in rural areas. They do not own their own transport. They'll be very lucky if they have a horse or a cow to pull the plow. Otherwise, they'll do that all by hand. To get to a market, which could be 10, 20, 30, 40 miles away, is a major expedition with all of their produce. Now, they don't know if the market 50 miles that way or the market 70 miles that way has a better price. This is a highly simple, basic service that lets them know where they can do it. In places like Senegal, they send out weather reports for fishermen so that they know whether or not to go out fishing. This is a great service called Frontline SMS that allows a community-like communication system. This is a great service also from Kenya called iCow that teaches people the basics of pharmacy, if they need of dairy, looking after the dairy, if they need to find a vet, for instance. And this is a great example of the power of what technology can enable people, because the difference between a subsistence and an abundance farmer in the dairy industry is about 10 liters a day. If you can produce an extra 10 liters a day, you can lift your family out of poverty. It gives an entirely new meaning to the phrase, a rising tide lifts all ships. This is another example of an Amazon-like service in Nairobi, not in Nairobi, in Lagos. I don't know if you've ever been to Lagos or heard of Lagos. It's kind of like chaosville. The roads are terrible. It's impossible. The Nigerians get hit by 419 scams as well, I promise you. They do not want to spend their money unless they know they're going to get something. So these guys jump on a bike like this, and within 40 minutes will hand deliver to you the product that you bought online, and you pay cash for it. Really great service. And if you don't have any power, you'll have a guy like William Kamwamba, who actually built his own power source, which was this windmill made of second-hand bicycle parts. And in fact, Africans have been doing a lot before. You saw, which one to just wipe that? Africans have been innovating things for a long time. And there's a guy who is putting into orbit satellites like this Dragon. I mean, you've all heard of SpaceX. It's a guy called Elon Musk. Looks like that. You want to be on the front cover of Fortune these days. You've got to like build an electric car, fly shit to space, reinvent the solar industry. But he comes from a town about 50 kilometers north of where I live. Something else that Africa's doing is a thing called the Square Kilometer Array. This is an early precursor called Meerkat. It is a big European Union funded thing to look at deep space and where the future of everything will be. Now, what I love about the ingenuity of Africans is that it doesn't matter where or when it happens. That is a picture from the Great Depression in 1929. She's listening to the radio. That is someone listening to the radio in Africa last Thursday. And what always, pleases my Jewish heart is that he bought wholesale with the battery.
Thanks, Toby. So, making things in Africa can take a different shape. Thank you. And so this is a football. You'll see this in many small villages in the cities and towns, made by kids. And what they're doing is just taking plastic bags and twine and wrapping them up and making a football. And you think, well, that's pretty impressive. It's just a good use of what's found around you. But there's something about Africa that you have to really know, and that is if something bad happens, you're on your own. You either fix it, you make do with it, or you do without. So this is actually about 2-3 months ago up in the northern part of Kenya. We went on a little expedition and got royally stuck. It took us 4 hours of digging to get out of that. And we didn't even get out of it but from digging. Finally, another car came by and pulled us out. So what you see is that people make tools, they make things from the simple things around them. And it's really ingenuity born of necessity. These are people who don't have much, but they are very creative. And I have a very, my theory anyway, is that there is kind of an equal spread of creativity across the world. And it's really what people use around them and what they apply it to that you see the innovations that come up from it. So this is actually one of my favorite ones. We run an event every year called Maker Faire Africa. It's been in Ghana, Kenya, Egypt, and Nigeria. This year it'll be somewhere in southern Africa. And this was made by a Ghanaian farmer. He lived up north, and he'd seen a medical pill dispenser and seen how it worked, and he said, okay, maybe I can do something with that. So he took a pipe, and he created this maize planter. So you just walk along and you plunk it in the dirt, and it just releases a single seed every time you do that. And before you know it, you have a really interesting and useful product. So questions for people like him are, how do you scale that? Do you make a business out of it? But there's also other things that people make. And so here's a short video of a car made in Kenya. Just go, because give me something and I'll give you something back. I'm ready to just go, because give me something and I'll give you something back. So that's made by a friend of mine named Joel Jackson. And so how many here are designers? Work in the design school? So a couple of you. Okay, I see more. So, I see a lot of designers, right? I see the guys from Frog and IDEO. I see the guys, they come to Africa and they have ideas and stuff. And one of the things that separates people who actually create really innovative things in Africa and those who don't, especially from those who come from afar, is the fact that people who come from afar and stay longer do better. Right? They get integrated in with the local culture and I start understanding things a little bit better. And, so Joel actually came from the UK and he's been in Kenya for 4 or 5 years now. And that's the only reason he can build a car made for Africa. So there's a term we use in Kenya called Jua Kali. And Jua Kali is about side of the road innovation. These are the guys, it actually literally means hot sun. And it's the guys who sit on the side of the road, they beat metal with a hammer, and they make different things. And, you never know what it's going to be. It could be like this guy just making spikes. But it could be, tin chests. It could be, gates, beds, all types of things. So we decided to run this thing called Make It for Africa, like I said. And so here's a couple of things that have come up from it. So in Ghana, this is a chemical heater. This is a professor at one of the local universities. And he was trying to figure out how to make a heater, and then he would stick these things inside refrigerators that would hold the heat, and you could keep things warm for longer. Now, Ghana is already warm. I'm not sure the actual business viability of the idea, but it was a really interesting idea nonetheless. A sisal rope maker. So this guy spent 5 years making and iterating on his design until he finally got 2 products here that he could sell and he could sell locally, all made locally as well. This is one of my favorite ones. Okay, so this gentleman over here on the side, he's a college student, and one day his house got broken into, and they stole his TV. So what he did was he built this contraption. It's actually like an 11-phase security system. Okay, and that right down here, you can see there's a shocker on, off, 400 volts. You can turn, so basically when somebody breaks into his house, he gets an SMS message and he can turn it on or off. If he doesn't turn it off, when you touch the door handle and you leave, you get 400 volts coursing through you, which means you die. There's also things like this, designers kind of making stuff from waste. This is an interesting one, a self-driving car from Egypt. Rethinking recycling in Nigeria. This is actually a really interesting idea. They made these trikes, and they go around the neighborhood and they pick up trash, and people pay them for that. This is the farm king of Nigeria. That's literally what he calls himself. And it's a 4-in-1 processing machine. Basically, you can take all kinds of roots and tubers, and it does all kinds of processing, whether it's crushing them or shredding them. And so you can take it around, because it's on the trailer, you can take it around from town to town. This guy made a trike, a fully functioning, long,
Axle.
Yeah, a long axle trike, and he would ride it around town completely unlicensed, but because it's Nigeria, you can just pay somebody off. And then this one was really cool too. This kid had made hydraulic toys from just parts, right? So wood, cardboard, and syringes, so that he could move the things. He actually put motors inside them as well, so they could drive around. They'd have to be tethered. They weren't remote, as in just wireless, but he could move around with them. So there's a couple lessons to learn from this. Is that one is that there's actually a lot happening. So in each of these countries we go to, we get 100+ people who've prototyped and actually made things. You can't get up there unless you've made something, right? It's actually something you can touch. There's a lot going on. It takes some digging to find, though. The other thing is that you need local solutions to local problems. You can't expect to just do this from afar. You have to understand what's going on, and you have to have an understanding of the cultural nuance of the solution you're trying to solve for. Lastly, support and growth are lacking. Right? There's not an infrastructure. There's not sometimes an industry built around this. Very few of the countries in Africa have any type of industrial base. So they're mostly agricultural. So, what is there to support this type of activity? And one of the things I'm going to talk to later is one of the biggest problems we have is there's no way to prototype things. There's very few places where you can actually do kind of manufacturing of anything, as well as kind of just iterate through the process. And it's something we take for granted here in the West. But in places like Africa, it's something that's greatly in need if we're going to move from just an agricultural base to a manufacturing base as well.
So this idea of the internet is actually quite an old one. I mean, this is an example from 1848, and this was probably the first internetwork in the world, and it was just the shipping routes of the world. It was followed 100 years later by the telegraph system, and that was undersea cables that linked up the world and allowed you to send a telegraph stop. If you look at something like, so that's 100 years from shipping routes to telegraphs. If you look at something like Facebook, now this is December 2010, that's how many Facebook connections there were. You skip forward just 3 years to the difference the world is. And that's quite significant because it just shows you how fast things are developing and that the world we live in. And this is one of the most wonderful stories about problem solving in Africa, which, as Eric said, and I also believe is the purest form of innovation. It is innovation out of necessity. It is more than having to solve a problem. It's having to solve a problem because if you don't, there's no other way that anything is going to happen. If you get stuck in the mud, the chances are another car's not going to come along, so you have to find your own way out of the mud, as this great story shows.
So let me take you back just over 100 years ago to 1898. This is when Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson, recently of the British Army, was called up by the East Africa Company to build a railroad from Mombasa on the coast of Kenya all the way into Uganda. So the East Africa Railway was being born. Now, this was a time in the world when there was massive amounts of railways being built. The steam engines were being created all the time, and people were building these backbones of infrastructure into the rest of the world. Now, you got to remember, this was a time when, up until the railways, nobody for a couple thousand years had been able to move anything faster than a horse, or consistently move things faster than with a horse. So it was a really big thing, and the world was moving with it. A couple decades earlier, the golden spike had been hammered down in Utah, connecting east and west of the US. So Lieutenant Colonel Patterson was brought along for a specific problem, and that is they had to go across this place called Tsavo. Now, Tsavo is this kind of, it's a very rough and arid environment, and there's not a whole lot there, but there's a river there that they had to get the railway across. So this was his obstacle, but like many of these pioneering engineers of that day, he had to come up with a creative solution for that, but the bridge isn't that much of a creative solution. However, he had another obstacle. That is that he had man-eating lions who were following along after him, and this stopped their movement enough that it really messed up their situation. So what happened was the lions would come into camp at night, drag people screaming off just past the firelight, and start eating them. And there's nothing they could do. So what they started to do is say, okay, well, let's build these kind of thorn bomas, okay? And they built the thorn bomas. Let's get big raging fires going. Didn't matter. These guys these lions would jump over, they'd crawl through the thorn, and they'd grab people and drag them off into the night. That's a pretty visceral thing, right? And so you can imagine that he started losing workers. So people started heading back to Mombasa by the hundreds. And so he's not making any progress at all. And being the stalwart of empire that he is, he's got a problem, he's got to solve it. So he goes off and he does it. Now he's got a little bit of an ace up his sleeve in that, he's 31 years old, but he spent time in India, and he's actually quite an accomplished tiger hunter. So he goes off and hunts them. 9 months later, over a period of about 3 weeks, he bags both lions. Now these lions are big. They're 9 feet long each. They take 8 people to drag the carcass back to camp. They're actually at I think at the Chicago History Museum. It's not too far from here. And so he solves the problem. So
I just want to interrupt and say that a little while ago on Eric's website called afrigadget.com, there was another problem with lions eating somebody's, there was a shepherd and it was eating his flock.
Yeah.
And he came up with a really brilliant solution that didn't involve guns. Eric, just tell that story quickly.
talking about the kid with the lights?
Brilliant.
Yeah. So there's a 14-year-old kid who built a light for that would basically just turn on when the lions came near. So that way they didn't actually have to kill them. In many parts of Africa, the lions who come in and eat the livestock are considered pests, and so they are killed and taken care of that way. But if you can scare them away, then obviously you don't have to kill them, and it keeps the lion population higher. So yeah, a 14-year-old kid on the outskirts of Nairobi came up with this idea using kind of cheap Chinese lights and batteries and sensors. And so it's actually just another indication of how kind of creativity doesn't have any boundaries, even with age. So this is a map actually of the railways across the world today. And it's really interesting because you can see how much time and money has been put into this infrastructure. So this is Africa's railways. And you know, the idea was that the engineers of that time, their big problem to solve was connecting people and places, right? And our job today with the internet is to connect people and information. It's really interesting if you overlay the map of Africa's railways with Africa's internet terrestrial cable, that you start to see that they mirror each other. And it's, like Toby was saying earlier, it's not any great surprise because once you have infrastructure going somewhere, then the next thing along is the telephone. The next thing after that is a cable, right? And so this is what we have today, and it doesn't go very far. So what happens when you reach the end of the railway? Well, you've got a problem. If you're on the internet, you have really good connectivity if you're near one of these things. But if you're far away, like most of Africa, then you've got a problem. So the tools that we're building for connecting to the internet are generally being built here, or in Europe, or maybe in Japan. They're being built in China, actually, but they're designed in these other places. Here's our problem. The tools that we use, the technology that's designed, is designed in London and Detroit, but we need to use it in New Delhi and Nairobi, okay? And that's a problem, because the people who are coming up with the solutions don't live and deal with the problems every day. So the best router that you can buy won't work here, because you don't have power, you have limited connectivity, and you've got a really rough environment that beats things up all the time. This will. This is the brick. We designed it over the past 2 years in Nairobi. And the idea is, could we create a solution that would actually keep you connected if you had power spikes or brownouts, if you had no electricity, if your normal kind of Ethernet connection went out, how would you stay connected? So really simply, what does this do? This is old technology, nothing new about it. Routers, modems, batteries, but connected in a way and integrated in a way that's actually really valuable and useful if you live in a place like Nairobi. So you can power it up with anything, from a car battery to a solar panel. It's got a SIM card sitting right here. Any of 145 countries, including the US, you can just put a new SIM card in there. It already has the data for it, or the data settings for it, the APN data. So it'll just work as long as you have credit on it. Ethernet in, so if you have a cable, you can use it. You can power out. This is actually a really important thing. We have a problem with power in Africa, infrastructure, so how are you going to charge your phone? Well, you can charge it with this. It has 8 hours of battery inside of it, so even if the power goes out, you have a full day's worth of work. Also, when that cell phone tower isn't quite close enough, there's an antenna out, so you can connect to it, run your cable or your antenna up a tree or a building. And then, actually, maybe most importantly, on the bottom there's a GPIO. That's a general purpose input-output port. And what that allows you to do is connect any type of sensor or machine to it. And what's interesting about that is that there's a lot of people who have really expensive machinery and stuff all over the continent, your GEs and Shells of the world, and they need to know how they're doing. Right now, they're sending people out to them in trucks 2 or 3 times a week when they don't need to do that. With this, you can get that sent to your dashboard in your headquarters anywhere in the world.
So because Eric is so humble and we're starting to run out of time, I'm going to make him skip the next little bit about the brick. But what he won't tell you is that this is probably the most exciting piece of hardware innovation in the world right now. If you know the kind of people queuing up to get involved and to participate, it truly is quite remarkable, because it is the first thing made in Africa for an African environment. If you think about the applications for the rest of the developing world in Russia, Brazil, India, China is truly remarkable, where power remains one of the core things.
Awesome. So we really think of this as extending the railway lines of connectivity to the rest of the continent, right? How can we extend that? And what we found out is that there's not a lot of solutions that are actually really final mile solutions, last mile solutions. And that's what the brick is. You know, we think about its use with community health workers. They're already going out there with solar backpacks, and they're already making extra money off of those. What if they had internet connectivity that they could sell, and also have a way of caching that information and uploading it as they got closer to different cell phone towers? You know, I talked to you about GE a little bit before. There's a lot of power stations that are remote, and people need to know how they're doing. What if you could get that information quicker instead of having to send a truck out there every 2 or 3 days? Recently, we ran up north to test it. We took the bricks, and these are our early prototype editions, and what the things did was amazing. They actually stayed alive in some of the harshest conditions that you can find in Africa, truly off the grid. So the brick is really about connecting people and connecting things, and we think that's a really interesting way to put it, because a lot of us know and understand the need for our own connectivity, but we often forget that things need to be connected as well. And what I mean by that is, you know, when you have wells, water wells out there for people, and you can't tell if it's broken or it needs to be fixed, there's the effect of that on a whole population is amazing. What if you could tell if that well with a water flow sensor was broken or not? So really what we think of is this is the end of making do with things from other people, for other places, and with other needs. Instead, the brick is made by us, it's made for us, and it meets our needs. And coincidentally, it also meets the needs of about 3 billion other people around the world.
So this is a really great quote. I won't do death by PowerPoint and read it out to you, but what's so interesting is how people misunderstand what's possible. One of the richest families in South Africa, I suppose the Rockefellers of South Africa, who own the biggest mines, Anglo-American and De Beers, have disinvested from what you would think of as safe havens for keeping your money going, which is mining and diamonds, to invest in agriculture. Africa is an incredibly fertile continent. And I put it to you that the next great world wars will be fought over things like water, food, where the Second World War, people don't really understand that Germany had been in a state of deprivation since the First World War, forced by the Allied nations to pay off the debt of the First World War. They'd lived under major food rationing. You know, after the Second World War, it took a good 10 years for food rationing to stop in England, for instance. So people like to say that the Second World War was fought around things like oil and territory. The next great world wars, or the skirmishes, or the little battles, are not going to be fought about the riches, fought for the riches under the ground, but for food and water. And that's where Africa holds a remarkable advantage. Just to recap some of the things we've been telling you, Africa is mobile only. Eric Schmidt, the chairman of Google, when he was still the CEO, said at a massive cell phone conference in Barcelona a few years ago that Google programs for cell phones first. And he started the phrase mobile first, the fact that people will program first for a mobile device. I put it to you that it is mobile only. Most people in Africa will experience the internet not on a 14-inch screen or a 10-inch iPad. They will experience it on a black and white screen that looks like that. And that is where the future of internet connectivity will come from. A couple of other statistics that you need to remember is if you think about technology as in kind of the Maslow hierarchy. You know, what was that joke about the guy who almost died and he had this near-death experience and he came back and all of his friends said, "Are you okay? Are you alive?" And the other geek in the room said, "What was the Wi-Fi like in heaven?" You know, so that's where I think the great innovation in the world is happening, and that the gold of today is not under the ground. I believe we are the gold. I believe people are the gold of the world right now. And if you look at how people are solving problems, that's where I wore my Madiba t-shirt. Madiba is Nelson Mandela's clan name. It was the best job I ever had in my whole life. I was 25. My job was to follow him around. It's been, you know, downhill since then. Thank God I have a hot girlfriend and really smart friends who actually do things in the world as opposed to me who just tells their stories. But there's a reason people are so excited about Africa. There's a reason The Economist is saying things are going to happen. The the African Development Bank says in the next 5 years, 7 out of the 10 fastest growing economies are going to be in Africa. And there are increasing stories of people of student age giving up everything in their plush, wonderful first world homes to go live in Africa because it is the Wild West of today. This has absolutely nothing to do with our talk. I just really like the quote said by Michelle Obama. I don't know if you can see that when she was in South Africa last year. And I think it's just a brilliant thought. If Nelson Mandela could spend 27 years in jail refusing to deal with his captors until they treated him like a human being as opposed to a slave, why can't we all just do our homework? So that's how you get hold of us if you want to. I'm Toby Shapshak. He is Eric Hersman. I think we've managed to finish on time. We are answering questions next door. Is Christina here?